I came this close to walking away from everything I believed. But something kept me, and it's not what you think. No, I'm not going to tell you that I just knew Christianity was true all along, or that God, in his divine sovereignty, directly intervened in my life and set me back on track. But I'm also not going to tell you that I returned to the same beliefs I left, because I didn't. Something else stopped me, and it was the truth that I saw in the church and the teachings of Jesus. Despite the various misreadings, misinterpretations, and other general misgivings about life in the world that my faith tradition handed me. Maybe you're also on the fence, wondering what truth I could possibly be talking about. Well, it's not sin and redemption, it's not having truth or being right. So what is it? Let's talk about exactly that today. What this truth is, why it kept me from leaving, and why it just might help you too. Grace and peace to the seekers and the saints. I'm Joshua, a Jesus follower and truth seeker. Welcome to The Truth Intention, where we ask old questions in new ways. So unfortunately, in order to get to where things go really good, we have to go to where things get really, really bad. This is how I broke down. My life began, like many of you likely watching this, in a conservative evangelical faith tradition. Namely, I came from the Independent Fundamental Baptist movement. This conservatism was compounded by the fact that I did most of my growing up in the hills of Appalachia, where I often joke we're about 30 to 50 years behind the US at large. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, as we continue, nothing I say is a slight against my brothers and sisters in faith traditions like the one I grew up in. I love them very deeply. I wouldn't hear of saying anything against them. I will critique, but that's to edify, not to tear down. So with that out of the way, I think many of you know where I'm going with this whole breaking point thing. I had questions. Lots of questions, and the IFB movement overall doesn't really like questions all that much. They have a great deal of faith, but some let their tremendous faith be a crutch, a way to avoid having to study and ask those questions. And usually the ones who do study only study the ones whom they trust, or the people with whom they agree, the people who believe the same way they do. This led a very analytically minded, critically thinking, philosophical child like a young Joshua Callahan to a great many times questioning over his teachers' heads. I don't say this for pride, it's just the truth. There was no way for them to answer the questions I was asking because they didn't know what I was talking about. To exacerbate things even further, my questions were not of the sort that many were looking into at that time. Many of the adults in my life were looking to Answers in Genesis and other Christian science and apologetics organizations, but my questions leaned into the spiritual, the mystical, the magical even. And when no one was able to answer those questions from the Bible, I looked elsewhere, learning from many faiths and religions and hearing what they had to say on all these matters. And this is where the breakdown began. I heard teachings of love from the Christians, and also the Hindus and the Buddhists and many others like them. The thing is, the Christians were the only ones that didn't seem to actually be doing the love thing. I heard teachings on unity and forgiveness from many different faiths, and once again, Christians were among the least forgiving people I'd ever seen, and we had more infighting than any other religion I'd encountered. I noticed that the same thing happened with almost every Christian virtue, except for the ones where we were allowed to be superior. We, for instance, spoke truth every chance we got, but we did so entirely void of love. We did justice, but we didn't love mercy. We taught the guilt of sin, but I seldom heard the totality of forgiveness. We preached a lot about the fires of hell and so little about the kingdom of heaven. That cognitive dissonance, paired with my unanswered questions, led me on a road of over a decade of deconstruction. I won't bore you with the interim, I'll just give you the highlights. I tried repeatedly to reconcile the ideas that I was taught with the teachings of Jesus, with the things that I saw going on in the church, but I just couldn't. I tried digging further into the scriptures, but the framework I'd been given for study didn't get me anywhere. I tried just believing harder, but you can't make yourself believe something just because you think you're supposed to. Finally, I even surrendered my life to missions in hopes that I could just do something for the Jesus I loved and the things he taught. But I didn't even understand what missions was. Then I went to 2 Christian colleges, even met my wife at the first one. But I still couldn't reconcile all these things together. And all of this didn't push me toward answers, it pushed me toward breaking. And that brings me to where things went really, really bad. At the second school I attended, a small mission school in Ohio that I'm going to leave unnamed because I want to spare their reputation. As I said, I love these people deeply and I wouldn't hear of saying anything against them. But I had some ideas that differed from the ideas the school had. And when leadership changed, the new leadership really didn't like the ideas I held. And so I was asked to leave. All the plans that I'd made with my wife, with my church, with my family, unrightfully gone in an instant, and I had no power to do anything about it. I drove all my stuff home that weekend with the Worthy album by Beautiful Eulogy on repeat for the hours of driving. I cried, I prayed, I pulled over on the side of the road to scream at God. I was off and on with church and ministry, mostly off. Even when I showed up, I wasn't really there. I just wanted to prove someone wrong about something because I was hurt. I was devastated, bitter, angry, alienated. And honestly, that probably should have been the end. But instead, it was the beginning of something truer. It all began while I was still at that second school. I think it started in Job. At the second college I attended, I took a module class on the book of Job that taught me more than anything that God is more than anything. I was forced to look outside my faith tradition to see that God is working in ways I'll never understand. He is bigger, he is greater, he is higher. And if he can draw out Leviathan with a hook or stretch out the stars in the sky, then he's certainly bigger than my beliefs and dogma. So I began to question again. Then came Genesis, a book I was always taught was a scientific book, an existential ontology of the world as we know it. This is how God made all things in the 6 literal days of creation. And no, I'm not going to have that debate. Maybe another video much later on. This will not be that video. What Genesis taught me at this time was something within the first couple pages of our scriptures that I had never noticed before. The image of God, or in Latin theology terms, the imago Dei. I was made as something divine, something that bore an inherent connection to God himself. This began to change every aspect of how I lived, how I loved, how I engaged in conversation, how I taught, how I preached, how I went to work. Questions were everywhere. My every thought and action teemed with life and breath. I was learning to see why I hadn't left. I could never put a finger on it, but it was this. God is bigger than everything. He works outside of what we can see and loves each and every soul in this world. We are his image on earth, designed to perfectly reflect that love and pursue it with all authority. We're meant to love God by loving people in communities of others, all trying to do the same thing. That's the truth of the church. That is the message of the kingdom. Even though it's been stifled by dogma, political beliefs, tradition, and even bloodshed, there is a truth that lives in the message of the gospel through the communities of Jesus followers the world round that we call the church. But just as I began learning this and all of its implications and how it flowed so beautifully into the New Testament, my ideas were brought under scrutiny. I won't get into the details, but this is when I was asked to leave the second school. This is when I was broken, and when all of the growth that God had helped me achieve nearly went out the window under the force of bitterness. Still, I held on because the truth remained. And that's when I found the spiritual disciplines, or they found me. Disciplines like set-hour prayer, contemplative prayer, solitude, and meditation. And when all I could do was go through these motions, when my heart was entirely void of belief, these disciplines carried me through by creating a space for the God I knew deep down I still loved. And in practicing these disciplines, I found something ancient in the wisdom of the Christian sages and mystics throughout history. Real faith is found in faithfulness. Because I was faithful in these small practices, God was faithful to me and began restoring the joy of my salvation. So between the truths I was coming to see in the community of believers around me and the spiritual disciplines I began to keep to grow my faith when I had almost none, I found something greater than my faith tradition. I got down to the root of this whole Christianity thing. I grew a relationship with the God who created me and gave himself for me. Joshua, did you really just take us through all of that to tell us the same thing we've been told by everyone else? That it's about a relationship with God? Only sort of. I did go through all of that to tell you it's about a relationship with God. That's true. But there are other ways to find that relationship than the traditions we were brought up in, and I want to help you find it. We all lose our way, but it's so seldom our faults. Usually it can be traced back to a hurt or slight that we were dealt by the hand of one we thought was a brother or sister. So I want to help you find your way back to the Jesus you once loved, without the dogma, without the hypocrisy, the lies, and the abuse. I want to simply be the guy who walks with you on your way back and helps you when you stumble in the road. But how do you find your way back, and how does any of this help you directly? Well, I think the answer to that is to learn to trust God, not the systems we've built around him. Learn to hear the words of Jesus no matter what a pastor or teacher tells you he was supposed to have said. We've all been let down. We've all been hurt by the church. If you've been burned, you're not alone. Most of us are probably in the same boat. There's a reason you clicked on this video. This might even be your last effort to hold on to something true in Christianity. I'd wager that if you went to the comments, you'd see others who are just like you, dealing with the same questions, the same hurts, the same desire to keep the faith without the dogma. Are you doubting? Jesus is here for you, and he'll walk you through your doubt because God's truth doesn't demand that you be blind. It encourages you to wrestle with the Bible, to, like Jacob, wrestle with God himself and come to a more intimate knowledge of him because of it. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to wrestle with the real questions and find God's truth. We're going to ask the questions and sit with the tension of not having immediate answers. We're going to rebuild what was torn down, restore the joy and love that was lost, and walk together toward the Christ. So stick around, and maybe, just maybe, you too will find a reason to stay. Maybe this spoke to you. Maybe this confused you. I know it's a lot. Maybe you've got questions, and maybe they're concerns. Maybe you just want to come along for the ride. Whatever reason you're here for, you're welcome here. There's room for everyone at the foot of the cross. So stick around for more deconstruction, reconstruction, theology, the Bible, and what it means. Till next time, go in peace, walk in truth, follow always the law of love.